Hello everyone and welcome to another casual review. Today I'm talking about Darksiders 3. Now I am no stranger to the Darksiders series. I have played all of the other games leading up to this point and Darksiders Origins. And I was considering doing a replay through of Darksiders 1 and 2 because I haven't done a casual review on those ones yet. But I decided to hop straight into this one. And if you are curious, you can see my opinions about Darksiders Genesis on this channel. For those of you who aren't familiar, the plot revolves around the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and they are a race known as Nephilim. I'm not exactly going to go into the whole lore and plot about the Darksiders series. We're just going to focus on the story of Darksiders 3 in particular. I'm unclear when exactly Darksiders 3 takes place as far as the storyline goes. However, judging from the story beats, I assume that this takes place before Darksiders 1 chronologically. Our main character is Fury, and she is tasked with taking down the 7 deadly sins that broke loose from their prison. So we go to an apocalyptic world, and we explore this landscape in search of these deadly sins, and then we absorb them in our little soul prison. As Fury goes along, she originally starts out as someone who is very stubborn and basically has like a little bit of all of these 7 deadly sins. And I think that's kind of what they were going for, is as she encounters each of these sins, she realizes that some of these sins lie within herself and she overcomes those sins. However, her character growth didn't feel very organic, and it just felt very sudden. Like, she would encounter one of these sins, and they'd have a quick little banter, and afterwards she is talking to her companion, a watcher that the council assigned to her, and the watcher will just say, like, "Wow, you're really quiet, what's going on?" And she's just like, "Oh, I feel like I've really changed as a person." She doesn't say that like verbatim, but she essentially just says like that one fight just really like made her see the truth and how pure humans can be. And she takes these huge leaps in character growth very suddenly, and it just doesn't feel naturalistic. I do like where Fury eventually winded up because let's face it, all of these four horsemen are very edgy and serious and take themselves very cool, think like early God of War style. And then they come to grow on you as you play through them. At least that was the case for these first 3 games. And Fury is no different. I ended up actually really liking Fury. I just felt like her character development felt weird, like it wasn't totally fleshed out. It's like we were missing certain story beats in between her character growth. This game takes the gameplay in a very different direction compared to Darksiders 1 and 2, and I guess Genesis, but that's more of a different thing entirely. That's more like this top-down isometric view. In Darksiders 3, it takes more of a Dark Souls approach, as is very popular with games of this time. Darksiders 1 and 2 take more of like a 3D Zelda mixed with Prince of Persia, mixed with God of War kind of combat, and it's like they are blended all together into this really fun game. They never really did anything too original themselves, but it's just like they picked all of these really good parts from all of these different games and meshed them all together into one. Now, Darksiders 3 is that Dark Souls approach where the combat is more deliberate and takes a more careful approach compared to its hack and slasher predecessors. I personally don't like this type of genre that much. I've only played a couple other games like this, and I haven't really totally been swayed to this type of gameplay. However, if that's just what the creators of this game wanted to make, like I'm not upset about it. It's just I myself would have rather preferred the approach that particularly Darksiders 2 took, because that is my favorite game out of this whole Darksiders series. So if you've ever played a Dark Souls-like game before, you're kind of familiar with what to expect here. Every time you defeat an enemy, you gather up souls, and then you reach these certain checkpoints, and you can cash in these souls to level up and boost up your stats. But if you die before you hit one of these checkpoints, you drop all of your souls, and you are tasked with going back and retrieving them. In regular Dark Souls games, I believe if you die and you die again before retrieving your souls, those souls are just lost. However, I found that in this game, your souls will remain even if you die twice before retrieving them. They will linger on. And I'm not sure like what the limits of that are, or if the souls remain there forever until you do retrieve them. but it is a little more lenient in that way. As far as the combat controls, you do have two different styles. You can play with the style that they've developed specifically for this game, or you can play at I think it's called like the classic style, and that is more combat that you might be familiar with if you've played through the first two Darksiders games. And I decided to go with the combat style that the developers initially intended for this game, because it's been just a couple of years since I last played Darksiders 1 and 2, so it's not like I'm too attached to that kind of combat controls. As you move along, there are upgrades for your weapons and different enchantments that you attach to these weapons, and you can use these resources from one of the more well-known characters in the Darksiders universe named Ulthane. And if you gather up enough resources, he'll buff up the strength of one of your particular weapons. And you unlock different weapons over time. These are known as hollows, and basically like the first 4 bosses I think that you encounter, you will unlock an additional hollow, and these hollows have additional traversal techniques attached to them as well. So the first one, you get like these 2 dual-wielding quick fire blades, and this will make Fury's attacks have like a fire element attached to them, mainly her little projectile boomerang that she throws, and this can be used to burn webs that may have previously blocked your way. It also gives an additional jump from her double jump. She can launch upwards from there. She has like one that is like more of an icy ability, and this makes it so she can walk on water and jump off of certain walls. There's like one that is like electrical, and it gives her this little hover ability. So different things like that. And as you unlock these hollows, you can explore more of the world because it is unlocked that way. Very much like a Metroid style of gameplay. So you can upgrade all of those hollows too if you want and if you have the resources. However, I found I was mostly going to be using her main weapon, that being the whip, and so that's mostly what I focused on upgrading and giving all the strongest enhancements to. I like the idea of these hollows, and I like that it changes up her appearance slightly. It just like changes the color of her hair, so you know exactly what type of hollow you have equipped at the time. And granted, I bet some of these hollows are actually really fun to combat with. One of my favorite weapons in video games is like a big hefty hammer, and they definitely give you one of those here. But because my whip was so much more upgraded and powerful, I felt like I'd be starting over by upgrading her hammer. And I think a way that they could have offset this is, I don't know, somehow maybe given us the option what weapon we want to start out as. So if I want to say like I want to play through this game as a big heavy hammer wielder, I can do so without having to unlock it when I'm like an eighth of the way through the game already. Now there are puzzles in this game just like the other Darksiders games. However, they aren't nearly as clever as the first 2 Darksiders games, which this type of genre doesn't really lend itself to those types of puzzles because you're not like going through this dungeon and repeating rooms and going through extra floors and stuff like that. It's more like you're going down channeled hallways with alternate pathways. So I don't know, I just felt like they didn't really need to add puzzles, but maybe they felt pressured to because the first 2 did have puzzles. They just got in the way more than anything because in this type of genre, combat takes the spotlight, and anything other than combat kind of distracts you from what the genre is all about. So this genre is also all about difficulty. It's all about learning how your opponents attack and move and learning how to maneuver around that. And in some games you are given a block or a parry or a dodge. This game seems to focus entirely on dodges in order to avoid attacks. And if you do a perfect dodge, then you are able to counterattack with a stronger attack. Now, for me personally, the difficulty is all over the place, and luckily enough, you are able to change the difficulty on the fly whenever you want. I think there's 4 or 5 tiers of difficulty, the easiest being known as a story mode, and the second higher one up, I think this is like the normal intended difficulty, being a balanced difficulty. And I would often skip between the two from the story and the balanced difficulty, because sometimes I felt like it was way too easy, and I was was wiping out guys with one hit, and other times I felt like it was super unfair and I was just getting tag teamed on. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm not very familiar with this type of gameplay, and I don't have that kind of patience and reaction time in order to persevere through a game if it's really giving me a lot of trouble. So if I'm stuck on like a super difficult boss, then I will bump it down to story mode, and that boss will still give me issues at time. And other like bosses or even regular enemies, I'll just completely wipe out on story mode, and that's when I bump it back up to balance. So I frequently change between the two, and I'm glad that it at least gave me the option to do so rather than locking me into one of those difficulties. I think the sweet spot would have been somewhere in the middle between balance and story, and I would have kept it like right there. Now, honestly, I do think that I would have persevered in the balanced difficulty, especially even for difficult bosses, if loading times were non-existent on this game. Now, I was playing the Nintendo Switch version of this game, and the performance on this is very poor, and I'll get more into that in a second. But as far as the loading times go for this game, it's about a minute, and so every time you die to a boss, you have to sit through this long minute loading time just stewing on what you did wrong during that boss fight. And if the checkpoint Volgrim is far away from where the boss was, you have to fight your way back up to that boss and try again. And by that time, it will have been maybe like 3 minutes since your last encounter with this boss, and you kind of start to forget like some of their movesets, and it just made me so frustrated. And because of that, I was playing worse and worse when I would do subsequent tries with these bosses. And that's one of the main reasons why I decided to go to the story difficulty when I was playing against some of these more difficult bosses, is because I didn't want to sit through that loading screen over and over again. If I was playing this game on like a high-end gaming rig or a PlayStation 5 where there are no loading screens, at least that's from what I understand, I think I would have had a lot more tolerance with this whole genre's approach of die and learn from your mistakes and try again. But the loading times just build up over time. I know a minute doesn't seem that long, but after 4 or 5 times of sitting through these loading times after dying and working your way back towards the boss, it can be very tedious and frustrating. Now, of course, you can practice your skills at this arena-typed field called the Crucible, and this gives you rewards. And the more rounds you fight in, the more rewards you can build up. And it's kind of like this risk-reward thing where if you decide to cash out, then you get your rewards. But if you keep fighting and then you die, then you lose all of your rewards. I think you do keep experience points, but other than that, you lose out on your tokens that you can use to cash in on resources in order to upgrade your weapons and things like that. I don't know, I just didn't really have the patience to get good, as they say. Now, the pacing of this whole game, not just Fury's character development, but the game itself just felt a little weird. Like, in between some of these sins, obviously, like, the sins are like the 7 big bosses that you fight through, and I felt like some of them would have these long stretches before you fight a sin. I think the first sin that you fight might have been Envy, and there were like maybe 3 or 4 hours before you got to the next sin, and I'm just like, holy cow, how long is this game? And then it seemed like there were just 3 sins right afterwards, like back to back to back, and then there was this huge long stretch in between those sins once more. So it just felt very disjointed. Like the pacing was just off. It didn't give you time to breathe and prepare for the next sin sometimes, and other times it just was like, okay, when is this gonna end? I'm ready to get to the next boss. Let's do this. There is a little indicator at the top of the screen where the closest sin is next, and I'm not sure if there is one single designated path. I believe that there is, but part of me wonders, because the difficulty was so all over the place for me personally, I wonder if I might have played some of these sins out of order. The environments are a little bland. I felt like they fixed this problem in Darksiders 2, where you go to a lot more colorful, contrasted environments, maybe a little more fantastical areas, but this is pretty much the norm for most Darksiders games. You are going to play in a lot of dark and dreary areas, so you're going to see a lot of blacks and browns, because that's the kind of environment that they normally are shooting for. So other than the long loading times, the frame rate is very bad. I don't know how I would possibly sugarcoat this, and normally this stuff doesn't bother me. Like, I play majorly on a Nintendo Switch. I'm used to this kind of performance for bigger AAA games such as this that are ported to the Switch. However, this game got so choppy, it would kind of give me a headache just turning around when a lot of stuff was going on the screen. Sometimes this wasn't an issue. Obviously, like the areas all around me didn't look nearly as good as they would have on a PlayStation 4 or a 5 or an Xbox or whatever. And that stuff doesn't bother me nearly as much as the frame rate dropping down into the single digits. And sometimes I would just enter in an area and there is no loading screen or anything like that, but you'll see a little icon at the bottom showing that the game is loading, and it would just completely freeze the game, and Fury would just be like standing right there frozen with nothing going on, and then after maybe like 20 or 30 seconds the whole environment would load in and she'd be able to move around again. I even encountered several hard crashes where my software just closed off, and one of these was at a very pivotal point, like during a boss fight or when I was like super far away from a checkpoint and I had to start all over. So this type of genre, it can be very devastating if you do get a hard crash, which I got several. Also, as far as like the frame rate issue goes, this type of genre needs you to be very quick, especially to land those perfect dodges in order to get a good counterattack. And the frame rate issues do not lend themselves well to that type of combat. I even encountered a glitch that I had to bypass the game to skip, and I looked this up online, and other people were also having this issue where you needed to push a really heavy block onto a pressure point, and this would open up the door for you. And this block was just completely missing in my game. I tried to teleport away from this place and back to it. The block never reappeared, or appeared for that matter. And I even tried to restart my game and the block was never here. Luckily enough, there is this little speed running trick that people used to bypass this particular part anyway, so I was able to still finish my game, but I would have been devastated because I was so close to the end when I encountered this glitch, and if there was no solution for this, I would have just been out of luck. Overall, I have mixed feelings about this game. Sometimes I would be really into it, actually, and I would be liking playing as Fury, and I would get really hyped when I got a new holo, or when I'm encountering a cool-looking Sin, and I'm into the story. Like, I do consider myself a fan of the Darksiders genre as a whole. Even the combat itself, I was kind of getting into. That tough but fair type of situation, like, as long as you're smart about it, you can get across these difficult challenges, and you do get a sense of accomplishment each time you do overcome those challenges. But other times, like, this game just wasn't working out for me. And as far as like the performance goes, I don't think a lot of people would be able to play this game on the Nintendo Switch, because my tolerance is just so low, and even I was considering stopping because it was that bad. I think I will give this game the score of 2 out of 5. If the performance of this game was acceptable, I would have given this score higher marks, a 3 out of 5, maybe even a 4 out of 5. But as it stands right now, this port of this game on the Nintendo Switch is just okay. Well, guys, that's it for me. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about Darksiders 3 or the Darksiders series in general, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye!